Good morning. I guess not everybody was going to come over, or they haven't found me. I've been wanting to watch this trial, and I decided this would be a good time to do it since everybody's up and in trial watching mode. Yay! Randy! Mel! Yay! Okay. Um, Phil Spector was a music producer and songwriter. He was really famous in the 60s. He did, I don't understand because I play the piano and I sing, but I really don't know. And I can read music, but I don't know like mixing and music producing and that kind of stuff. And he did some kind of a special wall of sound or something like that. So it was like very innovative back in the 60s. Um, Um, so yeah, he's kind of cray cray. He was married to Ronnie Spector. I forgot her maiden name. Anyway, she was the lead singer for the Ronettes, which back in the 60s. But if you don't remember her, I don't remember the Ronettes like originally. Yes, Alan Jackson prosecuted him. He was a prosecutor before he became a defense attorney. So Alan Jackson is Karen Reed's defense attorney. So that's why I wanted to watch this trial. Like I don't give a flip about Phil Spector. I when I started this channel, I did like real life. I did videos, pre-recorded videos on real life crimes that were similar to the crimes on Criminal Minds. And I should have already done a video on this one because I had planned to do one because there was an episode of Criminal Minds about um this rock star that takes like a groupie home and then she ends up dead and he gets blamed for it. So I was going to do this cuz it's kind of like the same thing. He took this woman home. Um he was an actress and she ended up dead. And he says that and I think I want to say he shot her in the mouth and he claimed that she did it to herself because of her failing actress career or something. And so he had two trials, kind of similar to the Menendez brothers. The first trial was a hung jury and it was televised. The second trial was not televised and he was found guilty and he got 19 years to life. I don't understand that, but whatever. He died in prison in 2021. So we're just going to do, well, depending on time, we're just going to do the opening statement, which is um, Alan Jackson. It's like an hour and 45 minutes. So if you're not familiar with the Ronettes, Eddie Money, the song Take Me Home Tonight, the part where it goes just like Ronnie sang, and then you can hear her. That's actually her. He got her to record with him, and then she sings "Be My Little Baby." That is Ronnie Spector. So that is Phil Spector's ex-wife. So that's a little bit of background. Oh, and he's also noted there's a Christmas album. It is one of the best Christmas albums of all time. And it says on the album, I just looked at it, Just for You from Phil Spector or something like that. But his name is like in the title of the album across the top. And it is like one of the best Christmas albums of all time. You might. Who knows? Okay. Now, this is on Court TV's websites. So if a commercial pops up, I'll try to get over it or I might go full screen or whatever. Because the last time I did one off of the Court TV website, I don't know how Kathy did it without commercials. Um, but the last time I did one from the Court TV website, I ended up with commercials. So I don't know. We'll wing it. I tried to download it so I could skip through commercials, and I can't figure out how to download it. So we'll figure it out together. Why? Why am I not? I'm confused. You guys can see this, right? You can see me and you can hear me. Well, someone just said, look how young he is, right? So you can see me. Why? I've got my channel pulled up and all I see is my thumbnail and it says live in 105 minutes. Why is it doing that? I know because yeah, I've not got it set up yet because I looked over at my channel and I don't see me. What is it doing? I'm still new, y'all. So I'm sorry. Okay, I just had to refresh it. Okay.
This is my opportunity uh, to talk with you for a few minutes about what we expect the evidence to show, the actual facts in this case to show. And that evidence, ladies and gentlemen, is going to paint a very, very clear picture. A picture of a man, Philip Spector, who, when he's confronted with the right circumstances, when he's confronted and dead, Lana Clarkson's mouth, inside her mouth, and shot her to death. But to understand
I don't know what's going on. StreamYard is freaking out on me. I hate when that happens. I got faster internet, so it would stop doing this. It doesn't do it as much, but it still wants to do it. I don't understand. Ugh.
to the real Philip Spector. On February 3rd, 2003, at about 5 o'clock in the morning, a single gunshot cracked the silence of the normally very quiet community of Alhambra, California. That gunshot came from almost a palatial home surrounded by, treated off from the rest of the community. A home that Philip Spector has adorned the name The Castle. When that single gunshot rang out, Adriana D'Souza, a private driver who had been hired by Philip Spector to drive him earlier that evening, or the evening beforehand, sat in Philip Spector's Mercedes. He heard the shot, thinking that it was a falling branch or a snapping twig. He got out of that Mercedes and he walked around. The evidence will show, ladies, that within minutes, that gun ringing, Adriana D'Souza sat back down, and you see it here, approximately where you see it parked here. Just as he began to shut the door, the Mercedes, which is situated, it's hard to tell, you'll get much more information about the layout of this particular residence. As he sat down back in the car, that Mercedes is situated right by a back door, literally from me to the bar, about 4.5, 5 feet away. As he began to shut the door of the Mercedes, getting back into the car, that back door creaked open. Philip Spector emerged from that back door, and you're looking at it here. Philip Spector was wearing the same white jacket that he had been wearing that evening before. In his right hand, a pistol. Between his fingers ran blood. Philip Spector looked directly at Adriana D'Souza from about 4 to 5 feet away and confessed, "I think I killed somebody." Adriana D'Souza, for his part, almost immediately went into shock or panic, and he began to call for help. He looked inside the doorway, saw only her feet. He looked a little further around Spector and saw what he'll describe as her bloody face. Adriana D'Souza had no idea, as he looked through that door, that Lana Clarkson was the person that defendant Philip Spector had just admitted having killed. You're going to hear details, many details about that night, about that crime. I should say early morning, I guess. But that evidence is not going to be presented, ladies and gentlemen, in a vacuum. In order to give context to what happened on February 3rd, 2003, you're going to be introduced to evidence, as I talked about just a second ago, about the defendant's history of violence, about his pattern of violence with women, his history of losing his temper, his history of flying into rages, his history of pulling guns on unarmed women. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that Lana Clarkson fell victim to Philip Spector on February 3rd, 2003 at about 5 o'clock in the morning, but she was simply the last in a very long line of women who had been victimized by Philip Spector over the years. Before Lana Clarkson came Stephanie Jennings, and before her, Dorothy Melvin, and before her, Melissa Grosvenor, and before her, Diane Halder. The evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that the defendant has a pattern, and that pattern began to emerge all the way back to the late 1980s. You'll hear that each of these incidents is strikingly similar to the next. And through the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, you'll hear from the first 4 women. Lana Clarkson, however, will have to tell her story from the evidence and from the grave. let's take a second and talk about Philip Spector's pattern with these women through the years. You're going to be introduced to Diane Ogden Halder. And you'll see on the graphic up toward the right, there's a house depicted. Before the defendant, Philip Spector lived in what he calls the castle in Alhambra. He had several other homes. Throughout the late 80s and 90s, he lived variously in Hollywood, as well as Pasadena. This happens to be an aerial photograph of the Pasadena home. And with each woman, you'll see, as we talk about the evidence that will be presented, the house that's associated with that particular woman's victimization. Who is Diane Ogden Halder? The evidence will show that she was a talent coordinator for the Grammy Awards in Los Angeles. She ran in some pretty haughty circles. Most of these women ran in some of the same circles that Philip Spector ran in. She'd been in the business, or she has been in the business of the Grammy Awards for a number of years, since the late 70s, 1978. And in 1982, she met Philip Spector at dinner. She was friends with Debbie Pryor, the late Richard Pryor's wife. Debbie Pryor introduced her to Philip Spector, and almost immediately, Philip Spector on dates. She'll describe the incident back in 1982, about 6 months into their dating relationship. They were at the Hollywood house, not the house that you see depicted in the graphic, but the Hollywood house, the one that he owned before the Pasadena home. She'll describe how the defendant had been drinking to excess. And you'll see, as the evidence unfolds, this pattern begin to emerge. And it usually begins with the defendant drinking and drinking to excess. They had been out on a dinner date and the defendant had been drinking. They came home late one night. She decided she wanted to leave. And again, that will play a huge part in the pattern that will begin to emerge. As soon as she said she wanted to leave, the defendant walked to the front foyer of the Hollywood house and locked the door and said, "You can't leave." But he was somewhat jovial. She'll describe his personality in that particular incident as almost joking. "No, you can't leave, Diane. You're not leaving here. You're not leaving until I tell you to leave." And she said, "Come on, Phil, it's getting late." 45 minutes or so, that incident took place. She wasn't assaulted at that point. He didn't pull a gun. He just didn't let her leave in that first incident. She put it behind her, didn't think another thing about it. Over the years, she maintained somewhat of a dating relationship with him, a somewhat casual dating relationship. And ultimately, in 1987, she began to work for him. He hired her as his personal assistant. And then came 1988. In addition to being his personal assistant, they also maintained somewhat of a dating relationship. Casual as it may have been, it was still a dating relationship. In 1988, they had gone to dinner. They were out on a date. The defendant had been drinking. He'd been drinking heavily, according to Don Halder. At about 2 o'clock in the morning, she said, "I'm ready to leave." She'll describe the defendant snapping, flying into a rage, profanities, cussing, swearing, screaming at her. The door was locked. She couldn't get out. This was at the Pasadena home. She'll tell you that he disappeared and emerged almost from nowhere. She'll describe it as she has no idea where he got this, but all of a sudden he produced a pistol. He held her at gunpoint. She literally, as she was trying to leave, had her purse on her shoulder, and she was standing in the foyer area of that Pasadena home. At gunpoint, he ordered her to sit down, so she did, still with the purse on her shoulder. He proceeded to press the barrel of the gun to various portions of her face and neck, literally driving the barrel of that steel weapon into her cheek, face, forehead, neck. She was crying, sobbing. She'll tell you that she was scared to death. She'll tell you that the reason she didn't just stand up and leave is because she was afraid, given his attitude, given his demeanor, that he would literally kill her. So he orders her to go upstairs. The bedrooms are upstairs. Ultimately, he ordered her to get in bed, and lay down next to him. She'll describe how she did exactly what he said, followed his orders, followed his directions. And ultimately, because of the late hour, because of the fact he had been drinking, because of the fact she had been drinking that night, he lay down, she lay down, and the gun was laying on the mattress right next to him within arm's reach. She finally, at some point, she doesn't know when, fell off to sleep. The next morning, she'll describe Philip Spector as almost a different person. She'll tell you that she awoke, found him downstairs, and he acted like absolutely nothing had happened. She chalked it up, she'll tell you, to an anomaly, something completely out of the blue, something completely out of the ordinary. She thought that couldn't have been Phil Spector. That couldn't have been the man that I knew. You'll see as the witnesses testify in this case, this pattern continually emerging. And you'll see the pattern. It may be a little bit difficult for you to read from there. You'll see the pattern with minor differences look something like this. The defendant had been drinking that night. He had a romantic interest in her. They had a dating relationship or a previous dating relationship, casual as it may have been. He brought her back to the house. They were home, alone, nobody else around, nobody else in the house. When she tried to leave, that was the catalyst that threw him into a rage. He produced a gun, pressed the barrel of the gun against her face, and forced her to spend the night. Again, she didn't realize that there was a pattern, and she'll tell you that. She thought it was an anomaly, something out of the blue, and she wanted to forget about it. The two of them never spoke about it. Then 2 weeks later, the defendant was having a dinner party. She actually set the dinner party up for them. She was his assistant. So she had guests come over to the Pasadena home. They had dinner, and the defendant began drinking and drinking and drinking. As the guests began to file out at the end of the evening, Diane Halder will tell you that her mind went back 2 weeks earlier. It was still fresh in her mind when the defendant had been drinking and they were home alone, and all of a sudden he turned into a different person. She decided, now's my chance. I don't want to go through that again. I'm going to take my leave now. As soon as the last guest left, she then grabbed her things and said, Phil, I'm leaving. And snap. They were home alone, and he flew into a rage yet again. This time, she was more expectant. She'll tell you that she thought she knew what was coming. So she immediately made her way out the back door toward her car. She looks behind her and sees that Philip Spector is chasing her to the car, again, armed with a weapon, a gun. She slams the car door, rolls the windows up, locks the doors, and he begins beating on the window, screaming, I'll kill you. If you try to leave, I'll kill you, or I'll shoot you, one of the two. She presses the gas and drives away. Now, at the end of the driveway is a gigantic wrought iron gate. You've seen the type of gated communities we're talking about, or gated homes that we're talking about, these big palatial homes. There was a big gate. But because guests had just been leaving, that gate was open, and she was able to make her leave. Diane Ogden Halder will tell you that after that second incident, she had had enough. She never saw him again. We'll introduce you to Melissa Grosvenor. Melissa Grosvenor is now married with children. She lives out of state, lives a very affluent, comfortable lifestyle with her husband and kids. But she'll tell you about the time when she met Philip Spector. At that time, she was living in New York. She no longer lives in New York. It was 1991. She was at a dinner party. Some of you may have heard the name Ahmet Ertegun. Ahmet Ertegun was a big, big record producer who has recently passed away. She met Philip Spector at that party. It was almost a meeting in passing. Yet Philip Spector then had his assistant track down who she the evidence that began asking her out, and she began accepting. She'll tell you that at first he was charming enough, a nice enough guy, so they began a dating relationship. Keep in mind, she lived in New York. Philip Spector, you'll hear, at that time, in those years, kept 2 residences. His main residence was here in Los Angeles, in the Pasadena home.
You know, people use that as an excuse all the time. Well, I was drunk. I don't remember. That doesn't mean that you're not absolved of whatever you did. In Florida, I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming it's that way everywhere. It should be, but in Florida specifically, I know that's not an excuse, because if you voluntarily take a substance and it alters you, even if it's beyond your control because you're altered, you willingly took that substance that altered you. So that's absolutely not an excuse to any wrong behavior you did while you were under the effect of the substance. So I've not seen this. I'm really interested on what his defense is, but the defense opening, there's like 3 parts to it. So we're not going to get to that today. I don't even know if we're going to be able to do defense opening in one session.
But when he would go to New York, which was often, and for long periods of time, he would keep in one of the fancy, maybe the plaza. And it may have been this bi-coastal type of dating relationship where they would see each other when they were in the same place. In 1992, for the first time, he asked Melissa to come out to California to see him. Come visit me at the Pasadena residence. I'll get you a hotel room. It'll be fine. No problem. She thought, well, I've got my own hotel. I'll have my freedom. I can come and go as I please. That sounds like a lot of fun. So she took him up on it, and he flew her out to Los Angeles. She dropped off her things at her hotel. She immediately went over to have dinner with Philip Spector. He took her out to the Beverly Hills Hotel, and they had dinner. He began drinking. After drink, he became unsteady. He looked like he was getting intoxicated. Finally, after he went back to the Pasadena home, it was late in the evening. And keep in mind, she's 3 hours later. Her body is telling her 3 hours later than it was here. She'll tell you she believes it was 1 or 2 in the morning. And of course, she felt like it was 3 or 4 or 5 in the morning, her time. She hadn't slept all night and she was exhausted. She wanted to leave. She'll tell you that Philip Spector turned his back when she said she wanted to leave, turned his back and walked out of the room. Didn't say a word, not a word. But when he came back through the door, he had a pistol in his hand. His arm was outstretched, and he was driving straight for her face with the gun. She was in what she considers to be a great room, and she doesn't know the Pasadena has maybe a large fireplace and an overstuffed chair. The defendant, Philip Spector, began screaming at her, profanities, cussing at her, calling her names, telling her she couldn't leave. If she tried to leave, he'd kill her. The gun in her face, literally inches from her face, she was forced to sit back down. The defendant paced in front of her and paced and paced and paced, with all the time, all the while, with the gun pointed at her face. Exhausted emotionally, exhausted physically, she finally fell asleep, literally where she sat, sitting straight up in a chair. She'll tell you how she recalls being awakened the next morning, being touched on the leg by Philip Spector's foot. She woke up, and she'll tell you that Philip Spector seemed to be a different person. He acted like nothing ever happened. He said, let's go to breakfast. Just another day. She figured, as she'll tell you, that's her chance to get out of the house. She accepted the invitation to breakfast. They went to IHOP or Denny's or someplace, got breakfast. And after breakfast, Philip Spector looked at her and sort of sheepishly said something about, I guess you're ready to leave now. And she said, yes, I am. She gathered her things from the hotel, directly went to the airport, flew away. and never saw him again, never saw him socially again. She'll tell you that they had contact once or twice or three times at a restaurant that she worked at back in New York. I believe the name of the restaurant was Elaine's, which was a favorite haunt of Phil Spector's. And that when he would come in, he would variously either try to talk to her, and if she ignored him, he would then, in her words, mad dog her, give her dirty looks. But she never saw him again socially after that. Again, the evidence will show that the same pattern begins to emerge with Melissa. The defendant was drinking or drunk. He had a romantic interest in her. He got her home alone. When she tried to leave, he produced a gun, flew into a rage, pointed the gun into her face, and forced her to stay the night.
Dumbass.
You'll meet Dorothy Melvin. Dorothy Melvin used to be Joan Rivers' personal manager. I told you there were going to be some people that you'd meet that used to run in pretty haughty circles, used to live pretty affluent lifestyles. These are the people that Philip Spector socialized with. He met Dorothy Melvin back in 1989. Almost immediately began asking her out. And they maintained somewhat of a casual dating relationship for several years. And she'll be honest and tell you, in her honest opinion, she thought that Phil Spector was a very charming guy. He could be very nice. And that's what underscored their dating relationship for a long while. She had never been to his home, however. Never. In '93, several years after that, and during the course of their dating relationship, she was out here in California. Now, Dorothy Melvin had her own bi-coastal lifestyle. She lived in New York part-time because she was Joan Rivers' manager, and Joan Rivers lives in New York, or at least has a home in New York. She also lived here in Los Angeles, and she, Dorothy Melvin, also lived here in Los Angeles. She kept a place on both coasts. So she was back here in July of 1993 for the 4th of July weekend, I believe it was, seeing friends and family. The defendant said, well, while you're out here, why don't you come to my Pasadena home? Let's hang out. She took him up on the offer. Again, first time she had ever been in his home or seen his house. And she'll tell you that they began playing pool. They were having fun. They were listening to music. It was a charming night. As a matter of fact, I think the word she used was, it was a lovely night or a lovely evening. But she'll tell you that Philip Spector polished off throughout the evening almost an entire fifth of vodka or some alcohol. He was drinking, drink after drink after drink after drink. And she noticed that he began to get drunk. He began to slur his speech, began to get unsteady on his feet. And at some point throughout the evening, it got late into the wee hours of the morning. She just fell asleep on the couch. She was downstairs and completely exhausted, fell asleep on the couch. She didn't try to leave. She just fell asleep on the couch. So she woke up the next morning, and she'll tell you that she looked around for Phil Spector. She couldn't find him in the living room, in the foyer area, in the kitchen. She couldn't find him. She walked out the back door toward what can be described as a motor court. You can see the outside of the house to the right of that picture is, I believe, where the back door, the rear door is, that she indicates she went outside. Again, she's not familiar with the home either. She had never been there before. And she walks out to a very strange sight. She sees Philip Spector standing outside, broad daylight, wearing a shoulder holster, pointing a pistol at her car. She turns around and says, Philip, what are you doing? And I think a little bit more colorful language than that. He immediately turns around and slaps her, backhands her, with his gun hand. He accuses her, where were you? Where were you? I couldn't find you, indicating he thought she had left. She said, Philip, I was asleep on the couch. How could you have missed me, for God's sake? I'm wearing a pink fuchsia jacket. Your couch is white. You couldn't have missed me. I was laying on the couch. Enraged, he kept the gun pointed at her face and ordered her back in the house. His words, "Get the fuck back in the house." She did as she was told and began crying. He held her at gunpoint inside that back door area. She begins begging, "Let me leave. I just want to get my stuff. I just want to get out of here." He won't let her leave. For minutes, this goes back and forth. "Let me leave. You can't leave. Let me leave. Shut up." Calling her names, profanities, in a rage, uncontrollable. All the while holding a pistol in her face, wearing a shoulder holster. She finally convinces him to let her leave. But he says, "If you leave, the purse stays here. I think you were stealing from me. I think you were doing something. The purse stays here." She says, "Well, I can't leave without my purse. My keys are in the purse." So he reaches into the bag, pulls out a set of keys, and throws them at her. She caught the keys, crying, walks in the car, starts the car, drives down the drive. Yes! The evidence will establish, remember those wrought iron gates we talked about? The evidence will establish those gates were closed. So she pulls to a stop at the end of the driveway, and all of a sudden she hears a very faint pitter-pat, footsteps.
Oh, yeah, there it comes.
She looks behind her and sees Philip Spector running down the driveway after her. This time he's put away the pistol and exchanged it for a shotgun. She hears the pump action of the shotgun and becomes frightened. Again, she begins to cry. He holds the shotgun in her face and says, "I told you to get the fuck out of here." Dorothy Melvin says, "Philip, the gate is closed." He said, "Oh, okay." Opens the gate. And as soon as he did, let me back up for a second. He said, "Oh, okay, I'll open the gate. But as soon as I do, then get the fuck out of here." Again, not giving her her purse. The same pattern that emerged with the other women that we've talked about begins to emerge here, as the evidence will show. He had been drinking through the evening. He has a romantic interest in her. He gets her home alone. First time she's ever been home alone with him. He pulls a handgun on her, flies into a rage. Then when she ultimately convinces him that she must leave, she wants to leave, he chases her out with a shotgun. And in this instance, because the purse had been left back, because her property had been stolen, she calls the police. We'll introduce you to at least one officer who, I'm sorry, there we go. At least one officer from the Pasadena Police Department who will tell you that he was one of the responding officers. And he'll tell you that he did, in fact, go to the location, that he did, in fact, meet Dorothy Melvin on that date, that he did, in fact, hear her story about what she had said concerning Phil Spector holding her at gunpoint, chasing her with a shotgun. And he did, in fact, meet Phil Spector at the back door, and he was wearing an empty shoulder holster. A cursory search of the interior of the residence found Dorothy Melvin's purse. A cursory search of the interior also found the shotgun. Now keep in mind, Dorothy Melvin will tell you, I was Joan Rivers' manager. If this got out, if I pressed charges, the tabloids would not read Philip Spector against Dorothy Melvin. In her mind, the tabloids would read Philip Spector against Joan Rivers. She did not want that to happen. She was protecting her employer's reputation. She decided, get my stuff back. All I care about is getting my passport back, Joan Rivers' passport back, my purse, the stuff that's in my purse. All I care about is getting my stuff and getting out of here. So the police conceded, got her stuff back. She drove away, and she never saw him again. Stephanie Jennings. Stephanie Jennings in 1994 was a professional photographer. And she focused on photographing rock icons. She met Philip Spector at the Philadelphia Music Alliance Awards in 1994 and photographed him there. He was either giving an award, getting an award, an MC something. He was at the event or at the ceremony. And she photographs him there. And a couple of months later, she's in New York at a restaurant, and she sees Spector sitting across the table, or rather sitting across the restaurant. She gets up from her table and walks over and reintroduces herself. Mr. Spector, I'm Stephanie Jennings. Remember me? I photographed you at the Philly Music Alliance Awards. And he said, oh yeah, I do remember you. And she'll tell you that he was very charming, invited her to sit down, have dinner with him. And from that point forward, they began somewhat of a dating relationship. Somewhat of a casual dating relationship, if you will. Most of it was on the East Coast. She lived in Philadelphia. He lived in New York, at least most of the time in New York, variously in California and back and forth. But in 1995, and I believe it was January 95, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremonies were held. Spector was going, something like that. So Spector invites Stephanie Jennings to join him at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremonies. Come down from Philadelphia. I'll get you a hotel room. It's going to begin to sound familiar. The evidence will show that she accepted his invitation. He got her a suite at the Carlisle Hotel. You can see the Carlisle Hotel is what the graphic that we've used here, because this is where that incident takes place. And keep in mind, this is not a normal hotel that you and I might stay in. The evidence will show that Philip Spector had a long-running residency, if you will, in New York at the Carlisle Hotel. It was, for all intents and purposes, the evidence will show, his home in New York. In 1995, she goes with him to the induction ceremony. After the ceremony, which is relatively short compared to the after party, she joins him at the after party. And she watches as he begins to drink. Drink after drink after drink after drink. She watches as he begins to get drunk, as he begins to slur his speech, as he begins to get unsteady on his feet. She watches him consuming excessive amounts of alcohol. And the hour's getting late, and she decides, you know what? That's about enough. I'm going to go home. What she meant is she was going to go back to the Carlisle Hotel, check in, and go to her suite. And she did exactly that. She goes to bed, curls up, falls asleep. In the middle of the night, somewhere around 3 a.m., I believe, she hears a knock on the door. She opens the door, and it's one of Philip Spector's bodyguards or his security personnel. Mr. Spector wants to see you down in his suite right now. Stephanie Jennings says, I don't want to go down to his suite right now. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm tired. I'm pooped. I'm going to go back to bed. So she shuts the door and does that. A few minutes later, she opens the door again. This time, it's Philip Spector standing in the hallway. He comes in and orders her down to the suite that he's staying in. She refuses, and an argument ensues. And the argument gets loud and boisterous, and he begins to lose his temper. And he's flying off the handle, she'll tell you. And she'll tell you that ultimately he said, I'm paying for this room. You do what I say. And she says, you know what? If that's the way you want it, I can pay for my own room. Walks out of the room without saying another word. The evidence will show that just a couple of minutes later, he walked back into the room carrying a pistol. He shuts the door behind him, sets a chair in front of the door, sits down in the chair, and holds Stephanie Jennings at gunpoint inside the hotel room. She begins to panic. She doesn't know what to do, and she can't get out. She can't leave. So she threatens Spector and says, if you don't let me out of here, I'll call the police. So Spector calls her bluff. Call the police. You'll be introduced to custodians of records from New York. And you'll see documents that are business records kept in the normal course of business. We can't read that. Well, maybe you can. It's bigger than I thought it was. Here in California, I don't know what they call them in New York. Here in California, there's something called an MDT, or mobile digital terminal, in every police car. And you ever notice when people are on the phone with 911, the operator sounds like she's typing or he's typing? Well, that MDT, or mobile digital terminal, is something that's in every single police car. It's literally a small computer in a police car. And instead of talking on the phone or cell phones or radios, the 911 operator can relay information to the actual units that are responding through typewriting. These documents are New York's version of that MDT. And you can read, and you'll see these documents presented through the evidence, that at the time that Philip Spector was literally holding Stephanie Jennings at bay with a gun at gunpoint, she's relaying this very same information to the police. Female threatened, assault, Stephanie Jennings, weapon involved. She's afraid to talk. Please help. The man is standing by the phone. He's a big celebrity. His name is Phil Spector, a 60-year-old. That's the information that Stephanie Jennings was literally relaying to the police while she was being held at gunpoint by Phil Spector. The evidence will show that ultimately the police did in fact arrive. She was escorted out of the hotel and left. Again, she'll say that she did not want anything to do with a criminal case. For her purposes, she just wanted out of there. She just wanted to be left alone at that point. And she'll tell you that after that, she never saw Phil Spector socially again. Yet again, the same pattern begins to emerge. The evidence will show that in this case as well, Spector had been drinking. He had a romantic interest in Stephanie Jennings. They were at the hotel by themselves in the room alone. When she tried to leave, he flew into a rage and he held her at gunpoint. You'll see through the evidence, ladies and gentlemen, that this pattern repeats itself over and over and over again. You'll see through the evidence that it repeats itself on February 2nd and 3rd, 2003. This same pattern begins to emerge with Lana Clarkson. Let's talk about what happened on February 2nd and 3rd, 2003.
Mr. Jackson, would this be a good time? I assume you have a ways to go.
I do have a little ways to go.
All right, let's, keeping in mind the court's admonition, ladies and gentlemen, we'll be in recess for 15 minutes. Thank you.
Everybody settled in? All right. When we left off, I was saying that the evidence will show this recurring pattern that'll crop up over and over and over throughout this trial. And it'll repeat itself yet again during the events of February 2nd and February 3rd, 2003. And what I want to do now is move into the events leading up to the murder, move into that night, and talk to you about what the evidence is going to show happened that particular night. And this map will give you an overview. I don't want to concentrate too long on it, but this map will give you a little bit of an overview about the locations that are going to be an issue on February 2nd, the evening hours of February 2nd, going into the early morning hours of February 3rd. First of all, Spector's house is in Alhambra, toward the east side of the map. You hear evidence that from there, he went to the Grill, which is a restaurant in Beverly Hills. From there, he went to Trader Vic's, also a restaurant in Beverly Hills. From Trader Vic's, during the hours, also went over to Dan Tana's, which moves up into Hollywood. And from Dan Tana's, he moved finally over to the House of Blues. From the House of Blues, it's from that location at about 2:20, 2:30 in the morning, he began his trip back to his Alhambra castle, as he puts it. What happened on the night before Lana Clarkson was shot to death in Phil Spector's foyer? It first started off with a dinner date with Rami Davis. Rami Davis was a friend of Phil Spector's from high school, and they had reunited, if you will, at a reunion, at a high school reunion, and become friends and basically dinner date buddies. But I think Rami Davis will tell you that there was not a romantic interest between the two of them. They were friends. She considered him his guy friend. He considered her his lady friend. They had dinners here and there. They got along well. But it was a platonic relationship. It wasn't a deep-seated romantic involvement. He picked her up about 7:30 in Studio City at her location, at her house. And he employed the services of Adriano D'Souza, a private driver who he had hired for the night. He, Phil Spector, had hired for the night. Phil Spector had a relatively new, as a matter of fact, I think it may have been a brand new S-Class Mercedes that he used for his get-around town car. And Adriano D'Souza was commissioned with the task of driving that car for Phil Spector and his guests that night, the first of them being Rami Davis. Picked her up about 7:30 and took her over to the grill to have dinner. Relatively early dinner, 7:30, 7:45, something like that. And they ordered dinner, and they also ordered drinks. And the evidence will establish throughout the course of the night how much Phil Spector had to drink, how much he ordered in terms of alcohol that night. So they had dinner and drinks there. Rami Davis will tell you that she has very, very early morning hours that she has to keep. So by 10 o'clock, she was pooped out. She wanted to go home. She did exactly that. She said, "Hey, Phil, I'm ready to go home. Can you have your driver drop me off?" He said, "Sure, I'll take you back." So he then takes the Mercedes, driven by Adriano D'Souza, and drives Rami Davis back to her location, back to her home in Studio City. However, before he left that night, he made contact with Kathy Sullivan. Kathy Sullivan worked at the grill. She was a waitress. Their relationship goes back about 5 years, their friendship. And she'll tell you, as a matter of fact, she's extremely sensitive about this fact. She'll tell you that she, in fact, wants to make it very, very clear that she was not romantically involved with Philip Spector. They were merely friends. They had met each other through other friends, and she and a couple of her girlfriends used to go out with Philip Spector. They would have dinner sometimes. They would go to the House of Blues sometimes, things of that nature. But it was not a romantic involvement. And Kathy Sullivan's very clear about that. She'll tell you that he saw her, or she saw him actually, I think, at dinner with her lady friend, with his lady friend, Rami Davis, and walked over and said hello. And during the course of the evening, Spector asked her, "Hey, do you want to go have a drink after you get off work? I'm going to take Rami home. You want to go grab a drink?" She said, "Well, I don't know, let me check." And he may have invited even others to go with, but the others declined. She accepted the invitation. She said, "Sure, you know what? I get off in just a little while. It's 10:45, something like that. I'll go with you to have a drink over at Trader Vic's." And he says, "Great, I'll come back after dropping off Rami and I'll pick you up." So he does exactly that. By 11 o'clock, they end up, Kathy Sullivan and Phil Spector end up over at Trader Vic's. Spector immediately ordered a Navy grog. And you'll hear from the management over at Trader Vic's, maybe a bartender, what a Navy grog is made out of. And I don't know what the recipe is. It's a specialty drink at Trader Vic's, and they're the only one. Will show is that each Navy grog contains not one, not two, but 3 full shots of rum in each Navy grog. He had 2 that night there. For her part, Kathy Sullivan, I think, ordered amaretto sours, and I don't know what's in that either, but somebody would use the word, I'm sure, frou-frou drink. I would never say that, but somebody might. But Kathy apparently had a taste for that particular drink that night, and while Phil Spector was drinking his Navy grogs, she was drinking amaretto sours. It's getting close to midnight now. Spector says, "You know what? You haven't eaten tonight, have you?" And Kathy says, "Don't worry about it. I'm not that hungry. I just, I'm getting tired. Come on, I'll feed you. Let's go over to Dan Tana's." She thinks, okay, all right, one more drink over at Dan Tana's, that's fine. Maybe a salad or something to eat. Kathy Sullivan had her car parked close to the grill where she had been working that night. Instead of driving all the way to Hollywood, which is where she lives, and then going to Dan Tana's. It made no sense to her. So she said, you know what, let me pick my car up and I'll take my car to my house. Just follow me to my house. We'll drop the car off and I'll get in your car. We'll go to Dan Tana's. So that's what happened. A little bit convoluted, but both cars end up going over to Kathy Sullivan's house. She drops her car off at her house in West Hollywood. She gets in the car with Spector and with Adriana D'Souza, and they go to Dan Tana's. That's a mouthful. It means very little. It just tells you what the evidence is going to show that night about how things transpired that night. So now Kathy Sullivan is without a car, and they're at Dan Tana's together. As soon as they arrived at Dan Tana's, Philip Spector ordered another Navy grog. You'll hear from the employees at Dan Tana's. Manuel Quadra is one. I think Craig Suker is another who used to work there. Bartenders and waiters, and they said, what's a Navy grog? They didn't know how to make it. They didn't know what it was, but that's what Mr. Spector wanted that night. He settled for a plain daiquiri, again, a rum drink, but that's what he got instead of the Navy grog, and Kathy Sullivan will tell you that she got another amaretto sour. They ordered a dinner salad of some sort, picked at the dinner salad for a little while, and decided to leave. As a matter of fact, I believe Miss Sullivan will tell you that during the course of the dinner at Dan Tana's, there was yet a second round.
I'm trying not to pause too much because I don't want this to take forever. I thought they weren't allowed to bring in past bad acts because it would be too prejudicial. But he's going way back and telling all these things he did to other women. I thought that wasn't allowed. No, I mean, I don't care because this guy is a horrible person and the jury deserves to know what he did in the past. But I thought that was a no-no.
Of drinks ordered. A second daiquiri, a second amaretto sour. As they began to leave Dan Tana's,
I'll get closer to my mic. I didn't think they were allowed to bring in bad acts from the past. Oh, because it's a pattern of behavior. Yeah, I don't mind them bringing it in. I think the jury needs to know that stuff, but a lot of times they don't. They leave it out.
Spector had yet another idea. Let's go to the House of Blues. At this point, Kathy Sullivan will tell you she was absolutely exhausted. She didn't feel, in her words, she didn't feel made up enough to go to the House of Blues. She had been working all night at the grill, on her feet all night. She hadn't changed clothes, hadn't showered, hadn't cleaned up. But she figured, you know what? The House of Blues is going to be closed anyway. Who cares? It's almost 2 o'clock in the morning. The House of Blues is going to be closed. We'll go over there, and he'll drop me off at the house. It's not that, at her house, it's not that far in any event. Much to her chagrin, the House of Blues wasn't closed. So they end up going over to the House of Blues. After they arrived, they immediately went to...
Well, I think this is where he met Lana or picked up Lana. So this is now becoming relevant and not a prior bad act, I think.
The VIP location at the House of Blues. That's called the Foundation Room. And ladies and gentlemen, that is the point at which Lana Clarkson, for the first time in her life, would meet her killer. It was at that doorway, that velvet rope at the Foundation Room, that Philip Spector first made contact with Lana Clarkson. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail in just a second. But right now, the evidence is going to focus your attention on the drinking pattern that Phil Spector had throughout the evening. As soon as he got into the Foundation Room, which took a little bit, but once he got in, he ordered Bacardi 151 straight up. It was just before 2 o'clock. They were about to close the bar. They can't serve alcohol after 2. But Sophia Holguin will tell you, a waitress that night, she'll tell you that she did, in fact, serve Spector Bacardi 151. Bacardi 151 contains almost double the amount of alcohol, the proof, that a normal alcohol does. Alcohol is normally about 80 proof. Bacardi 151 is almost double that at 150 proof. That was his single drink at the House of Blues. You'll see the receipts, and you'll hear evidence from each of the management or waiters at one of these locations, at each of these locations rather. First at the grill, the 2 daiquiris that were ordered by Phil Spector at the grill. And assuming that Rami Davis may have had one of those, Phil Spector had the other. The amaretto sours and the 2 Navy grogs that Phil Spector drunk at Trader Vic's. The bar tab is not as detailed at Dan Tana's. They're a little bit old school there, but the evidence will show that he ordered 2, at least 2, plain daiquiris. And finally, at the House of Blues, the Bacardi 151. Throughout the course of the night, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will show that Phil Spector ordered somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 separate drinks worth of alcohol that night. At the grill, a drink. At Trader Vic's, 2 drinks, but each containing 3 shots of alcohol. At Dan Tana's, 2 drinks. At House of Blues, 1 drink. But arguably, the drink at the House of Blues containing twice the alcohol that a normal drink does. There's no question as to his state of sobriety. There will be no question based on the evidence as to his state of sobriety throughout that evening. I told you that it was at the foundation room that Lana Clarkson first made contact with and met Phil Spector. You'll see from documents, business records, that she was in fact the foundation room door hostess. That was her job. She punched in at about 6 o'clock that evening, punched out about 2:20 or so. And when she punched out, ultimately she left with Phil Spector. And we'll get to the details of that in just a second. How is it that they met? And what will be the evidence that shows that they had never met before? One of the most powerful pieces of evidence is that Lana Clarkson thought Phil Spector was a woman. He walked up and said, with Kathy Sullivan, and said, I want to go in the foundation room. Of course, she's working door security at the foundation room, and only VIPs get in. She'd been working at the House of Blues for about 6 weeks or so. So she said, I'm sorry, sir, you're not on the list. We've all either heard that or we know someone who's heard that famous line by door personnel. You're not on the list. I think we all kind of live our lives not being on the list. And Phil Spector then recites the mantra of be rich and famous. Do you know who I am? Clarkson answered, nope, sure don't. And he said, I'm Phil Spector. And she said, oh, I'm sorry, Mrs. Spector. And he said, no, Phil Spector. And she said, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. I don't know you and you're not on the list. She was then taken aside or approached by Euphrates Lavandres, or one of the other employees of the House of Blues. And it was explained to her very clearly, I know you don't recognize this guy. He's Phil Spector. Treat him like you would treat Dan Aykroyd. Treat him like gold. The evidence will show that that told Lana Clarkson exactly who Phil Spector was and how he was to be treated. Dan Aykroyd, as some of you or maybe all of you know, the evidence will show, was the founding owner of the House of Blues. So she now had her orders on how to treat Phil Spector. He was escorted into the foundation room, and she immediately began to fawn over him. Is there anything I can get you, Mr. Spector? I'm sorry for the confusion. If you need anything, please come to me. My name is Lana. I'll be glad to help you with anything you need. If you need a drink, we'll take care of that. What else do you need? Are the pillows fluffed enough? Etc. She began to fawn over him. And not knowing who he was, not knowing who she was, the evidence will suggest that he began to flirt with her. At one point, according to Sophia Holguin, they were having a conversation, and Phil Spector actually said, you know what, Lana, just sit down here next to me. Just sit down and have a drink. And she said, oh, I can't have a drink with you. I'm working. And he said, sit down and have a drink. Of course, the evidence will show that she thought at this point she needed to treat him like an owner. If an owner says, sit down and have a drink, she needs to check on that. So she calls on the radio and says, hey, Philip Spector is asking me to sit down and have a drink. Am I allowed to do that? She calls a manager. The manager says, no, you're on duty. She said, Mr. Spector, I'm sorry. I can't drink with you. The evidence will show that he said, well, maybe later then. That was the contact that Philip Spector and Lana Clarkson had at the foundation room on the night of her death, on the morning of her death. This is a still photograph from a surveillance video that was taken at the House of Blues. And there has been some misconception about her state of dress or undress. And the evidence will show, ladies and gentlemen, that that has been inaccurately assumed. As you can see from this photograph, Lana Clarkson was wearing a slip dress cut just above the knees, a dark jacket, and of course, it looks gray in this photograph. I mean, you can see her legs, you can see where this dress hits the knees. In this photograph, it looks like it's gray. It's only because this is a very, very poor quality surveillance video of Lana Clarkson that night in the foundation room, walking through the camera angle. That dress is actually black. It shows up gray on this, but the evidence will show that that dress, that slip dress, is not nylon. It's actually black. It's as black as her jacket is. 55 minutes after this photograph was taken. She's also depicted in this still photograph of the side surveillance camera. In this photograph, you can see she's the taller of the two individuals. Phil Spector is the shorter of the two, as she walks out toward the Mercedes. And again, it looks like Mr. Spector is wearing all white. In actuality, the jacket that he's wearing is white. The pants he's wearing are black. They look white on this particular video, and you'll hear evidence from Adriano De Souza that even his photograph, he was wearing a complete black suit that night. Even his suit turns out miscolored or grayish or whitish on this overexposed surveillance video. But that is Lana Clarkson escorting Phil Spector down to his car. You may be able to see the time, bottom right, 2:23 in the morning, just before 2:30 in the morning. Adriano De Souza will tell you that when they got down to the car, ladies and gentlemen, Philip Spector began insisting that Lana Clarkson come home with him. Come back to my castle. I want to show you the castle. I have a castle in Alhambra. You got to see the castle. Come back to the castle. Have one drink with me back at the castle. Lana Clarkson's response was pretty consistent down at the car. No, I got to work tomorrow. It's late. No, I don't know. No, thank you, but no. Finally, after several minutes of insisting, she said, okay, all right, you know what? One drink. But I can't leave my car here. Adriano De Souza will tell you that she was insistent. I cannot leave my car in the parking structure. Why? Because it'll get locked up and I won't be able to get it a little bit later. My car will be locked up. I can't have that. And I got to have my access to my car later. The evidence will show that Spector said, okay, that's fine. Let's move your car, and then I'll have my driver take you back to Alhambra. Then when we get done, he'll drive you back to your car. It'll be fine. So she does that. She joins him at the parking garage. Together, they repark her car. It's a black Cougar. They park it on the street. She gets into the Mercedes. And just before Adriano De Souza shuts the door for her, she looks at him and says in a low voice, it's okay. I'm just going to stay for one drink. Just one drink. Spector immediately barked at her, don't talk to the driver. And she stayed quiet. The door was shut. And De Souza drove them back to the location in Alhambra, to the castle. They got back to the Alhambra residence at about 3 o'clock in the morning. Approximately 2 hours later, Adriano De Souza was sitting outside the back door. This is the motor court. You'll get familiar with where that motor court is. If you can think about the house being shaped like a lazy horseshoe, there's a main house and two wings that drop down at an angle. North is easy. North is toward the top. South is toward the motor court where there's a big fountain. And then, of course, the east and west wings. You'll see that footprint in just a second. Adriano De Souza sat in this Mercedes at this location, just outside the back door. And as you can see, he was merely feet to the left of that back door. He sat there at about 5 o'clock in the morning, listening to quiet music, playing with the GPS on the Mercedes because it was new. He wasn't used to it, so he was playing with that. The windows were rolled up. And out of nowhere, pow, one shot. He had no idea what he had just heard. He got out of the left side of the door, the left door of the Mercedes. He was sitting in the driver's seat. He walked around the Mercedes and then walked all the way around the fountain, thinking a tree branch had snapped, fallen close by, a tire maybe popped, something. As he did, he realized nothing was amiss, or at least he could find nothing amiss. He walked back to the driver's side of the Mercedes and began to sit down. Just as soon as that door closed, and he'll estimate for you that it was about 2 minutes or so from the crack of that gunshot before he got back in the Mercedes, and just as soon as he got back in, began to creep open. Philip Spector, and this was his view, by the way, Adriana D'Souza's view, looking at the back door. Philip Spector stepped out on that porch. He had a gun in his hand, a pistol in his right hand, and it was 90 degrees. His arm was bent 90 degrees parallel to the ground. He had blood running between his fingers. Adriana D'Souza remembers seeing something that he believes was blood running between his fingers. Spector looked at him square in the eye, didn't say another word, and he confessed, "I think I killed somebody." Adriana D'Souza, shocked and not sure he had heard what he thought he heard from the gunshot, shocked, said, "Well, what happened, sir?" Spector's response was simply this: a shrug. He then turned around and stared back into the house, staring at Lana Clarkson's body. Adriana D'Souza looked around Spector. And you'll see from the graphic image that I've put on the overhead right now, this is not to scale, but it's pretty close to what Adriana D'Souza describes the positioning of everybody being. As Spector stood in that doorway, D'Souza looked around him. Her feet. That's all first. Stretched down. He looked a little further. Her face, bloody. He panicked and started calling for help. His first call, he'll tell you he was so panicked and panic-stricken that his first call, he couldn't even dial 911. He just dialed the speed dial on his phone, which was to Michelle Blaine. Michelle Blaine, you'll hear Spector's person. Spector doesn't say Adriana D'Souza make sure they never please on and was called. Call the lane. While he was inside the Mercedes. Adriana D'Souza will tell you that he was so panicked and he had the keys to the car either in his hands or they were still in the ignition, one of the two, and he began to run down the driveway. He literally began to run away from the car that could take him down the driveway. He got 10 or 20 feet and realized And this is the call or the recording of to Michelle Blaine. He made that call while he was inside the Mercedes. Adriana D'Souza will tell you of the evidence in this case.
Sorry, guys. I got faster internet and it still acts up. And now I'm not sure. Oh, I know how to tell where we were. There was a slide up about the phone call. I just have to find it again. I don't think we were that far. Well, dang it, I can't find it. Okay, well, we saw. Okay, hold on. You guys, I am so sorry.
Souza sat in this Mercedes at this location, just outside the back door. And as you can see, he was merely feet to the left of that back door. Quiet music,
I'm trying to
playing
figure
with
out
the
where we
GPS
were, so I need you guys to help.
face, bloody. D'Souza met Angeles County, where you call one from a cell phone. There is in place certain computer protocols. Cell phone 911 calls always start with CHP, no matter where you are. Then if the California Highway Patrol determines that in fact the call needs to be redirected to a local agency, they'll do that. That's what happened in this case. 911 call.
Okay, can you hear me? No, please tell me when there's no sound, please. I got faster internet, y'all. It used to be worse than this. I'm gonna have to speed it. I'm gonna have to go to the next level higher on this internet. Ah! And I just got monetized. Dang it! I can't keep doing this if I'm getting money from people because they're not gonna pay me if I'm crappy. I don't know why. I've got my mic is up, and I'm right into it too. Ugh, okay. I don't know why StreamYard I finally found where we were and StreamYard disconnected my audio. StreamYard just hates me.
Car that could take him down the driveway. He got 10 or 20 feet and realized, I just left the car. So he turns on his heel, runs back to the car, jumps in the car, slams the door, and drives up into the driveway. I'll tell you, he didn't go back to the house. He drove to the end of the driveway to make sure that he had the address correct. Even though he'd been to the location several times, he wasn't sure of the actual address, the street address, but he knew it was posted down below at the mouth of the driveway. So that's where he was when he called Michelle. As soon as he hung the phone up from calling Michelle and leaving this message, this frantic message, he then called 911. This is his call. Can we stop that, Tootie? We may have to start this over. I want to leave you with something as you listen to this. This is a CHP call. The evidence will show in Los Angeles County, whenever you call 911 from a cell phone, there is in place certain computer protocols. Cell phone 911 calls always start CHP, no matter where you are. Then if California determines that in fact the needs to be redirected to a local agency, they'll do that. That's what happened in this case. The 911 call was originally to CHP. Then there's a transfer call to the Ann Arbor Police Department. Now on this tape, you'll also hear at the very end of it some very distinct bleed over. That's not transcribed. The bleed over is a different conversation. The conversation that you will be introduced to through the evidence is the conversation between the 911 operators and Adriana D'Souza. Okay? Whenever you're ready.
Hi, my name is Adrian. I'm a Phil Spector driver. I think my boss killed somebody. Please, can you send me you think your boss killed somebody? Yes, sir. Yeah. Because I'm way outside and I don't know what the where are you at? It's 1700 Grandview Drive, please. 1700 Grandview? Yes. And why do you believe you may kill somebody? Because you have a lady on the floor, and he has a gun and leave him. Okay, stay on the line. You're not hang up. You're going. Yeah. No, I'm on yeah, but it's 1700. Did you hear him shoot her or anything? And yeah, he opened the door and I think I killed her. And then I'm outside the castle. Stay on the line. You're not hanging up.
I
I'm on one where you're reporting. Hi, it's my name is Adrian. Inspector. I think I lost you.
Transfer call.
Yeah. I'll bring my car from California.
I'm sorry. I know it's not funny, but something about the way he talks to the 911 operator just strikes me as funny. Why do you think your boss shot someone? Because there's a lady on the floor and he has a gun in his hand. And then when they ask him to say it again, he's like, again? I hope he testifies. The corn rake, a corn rake, I don't know why you use it, but it looks like a pitchfork, but it's sharper. I don't know what you use it for. I think it was back in 2018. Some guy, 5 years prior, um, to her death in 2018, she had an affair. She was a ER nurse. So they went to marriage counseling, and then um, she quit her job, and they supposedly reconciled, but it was more like she was a prisoner in their home. She had to quit her job, work on the farm, and he had to keep tabs on her all the time. Then she ended up having an affair with one of the workers on the farm, and her son, 12, 13-year-old son, found her laying on her face with the corn rake in her back. A corn rake has 4 tines, but she had 6 puncture wounds in her back that didn't line up. They were going different directions. And her husband said that she fell on the corn rake. How? It was sticking out of her back and she was face down. Anyway, he was found guilty, but now he says there's new information and he wants a new trial. So he's they're calling it a civil trial, and he's got like 40 witnesses lined up with the new information. Well, I guess this video is not monetized. I just got the email or whatever this morning. I guess now I have to do something to activate it. I don't know. I have one mod. Wait, she was here a minute ago. Is she still here? Yeah, I have one mod. There she is. Hey, Judy. I lost my train of thought. Oh, so he wants a new trial. So what this corn rake murder trial thing is, it's not really a trial. It's a hearing, I guess. I know, I hate it. Unaliving, pew pew. What's the other one? Oh, we decided baby corn. RA and Runkle calls it cheese pizza, but I thought that was stupid. So I just tried to make her one. It didn't go. No, it says you are. Why aren't you blue? Type something, Lori. Well, it's baby corn on my channel. Okay, let's get this over with so we don't miss RA.
Yeah. He has a gun in his hand. Oh, and where's the man now? Yeah, come here. Sir, where's the man? The man with the gun, where is he? Oh, it's kind of careful because I'm outside. I'm afraid to go inside here. I saw him with the gun? Yeah, I saw him with the gun. Who did he shoot? I don't know the name. Okay, so stand on, okay? Okay, please, fast. Okay, come on, okay? Sir, Ian? Yeah. You said that's your boss. Okay. Yeah. I'm his driver. Oh, you're his driver? Yeah, I'm his driver. What's he drive? His taxi? I'm not, sorry? I'm sorry, what's he drive? I'm driving my city. Who's driving your city? Oh my God. Okay.
Sorry. Dang it. Every time I type, something happens. I'm trying not to pause it, but then when I type, something always goes wrong. Well, not always, but half the time when I type, something goes wrong. Why are you buffering? And the sad part is I am wired in with an Ethernet cable. I'm not even on Wi-Fi. Can you guys hear my chair squeaking? Can you guys hear that? StreamYard, what the fudge? No, I don't. I don't have anything else that's connect. Well, my phone's connected, but it's not. I'm not doing anything on it or anything.
You said that's your boss. Okay, I driver. Oh, you're the driver? Yeah, I'm a driver. I'm not fine. I'm sorry, what are you driving? I'm driving my city. Driving your city. Oh my God. Okay, follow that. Okay. Okay. So that's why I feel and then I have a battery drive. Be careful. No, I'm a private driver. I think you're one star. Adrian. And he started possible and possibly starting to go to that travel. When I started Grandview. Phil Spector. Spector. Yes. S-E-A-L? P-H-I-L. Spector. You can have one person? You be an Asian person, an Hispanic person, or a white person? No, a white person. And you say you still P-H-I-L? Yeah, P-H-I-L. Oh, Phil. Phil, yeah. Phil Spector? Okay. Yeah. You see or hear the answer. Which side is that? I'm not deciding anyone. I'm not sure which side. And what's the or how the guy? The police guy come. Okay, sir. What's your name? Adrian. Oh, yeah, sorry, you gave me that.
You know what I mean? Call the last one you did. Okay, and your phone number is
667-5309.
Okay, and then they contacted you? Oh, let's see, you found a question. No, it's coming on. Okay. So, honey, Cameron, I need to call with the refrigerator. What other you were saying? Correct. Maybe that's the option contacted you first, okay? It's kind of, it's kind of. Okay, you're going to talk to him, okay?
Your Honor, this is probably as good a time as any.
All right, keeping in mind the court's admonition, ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume after lunch at 1:30 this afternoon. Thank you.
The House of Blues, one thing that I may have left out that I want to make sure everybody's clear about, what the evidence will show, is when the defendant actually met Lana Clarkson, it was at the foundation room for the first time, and of course, Kathy Sullivan was with him. I may have failed, and if I didn't, I just can't remember, I may have failed to tell you that at some point when the defendant ordered his Bacardi 151, the rum that we talked about, Kathy Sullivan said, it's so late, all I want is water. And the defendant barked at her, well, if all you're getting is water, then you need to go home. Adriana D'Souza then took Kathy Sullivan home. So the point at which Lana Clarkson began socializing, if you will, at the House of Blues with Philip Spector, Kathy Sullivan had taken her leave for the night. She had gone home. Adriana D'Souza had taken her home, dropped her off at her house, and simply come back to pick up Phil Spector. And that brings us back to the point where we're at outside the residence when that gunshot went off, when Adriana D'Souza saw the defendant walk outside, jacket on, gun in hand, blood on his hands, her blood literally on his hands, as the evidence will show, and confess, I think I killed somebody. We were just at the point when we left off at the lunch break of letting you listen to what the evidence will be concerning Adriana D'Souza's conduct. In the span of 30 seconds, he made 2 phone calls for help. The first to Michelle Blaine, the second to the 911 operators with whom he spoke just shortly thereafter. When Adriana D'Souza made that phone call, as he was on the phone to 911, again, he had no way of knowing. He had no clue exactly what had happened inside the house until Phil Spector told him. He didn't know, as he was driving down that hill to make a call for help, to make 2 calls for help, that Lana Clarkson lay slumped in a chair, dressed exactly as she had been dressed earlier that night, sitting by the back door with her head slumped to one side, having been shot through the mouth, brutally killed. The coroner will testify in this case, but I'm going to move off that slide for just a second, out of deference. The coroner in this case will testify that Lana Clarkson died almost immediately. She suffered a single gunshot wound through the mouth, the bullet lodging at the top of her neck or base of her skull toward the back of her head. That single gunshot wound did not penetrate. Rather, the bullet stayed in the back of her head. Her spinal cord was cut. She was immediately incapacitated. She was immediately dead. She couldn't breathe. She couldn't blink. She couldn't move a muscle. In addition to the defendant's confession, in addition to his own words telling you what happened inside that foyer that night or that morning, there's another set of evidence, an additional set of evidence, both physical evidence and forensic evidence that will tell you exactly what happened inside the foyer. Before we get started with that, I've presented you with a graphic diagram. Again, this is not a scale diagram, but it gives you an idea of the footprint of that Alhambra mansion, that Alhambra castle, as Mr. Spector likes to call it. And I told you it would look like a lazy horseshoe. There's the main part of the house and then two wings off the edges, the east and the west. North is to the top and south is down toward the motor court. So when we talk about north, south, east, and west, you can sort of orient yourself along the lines that we've presented here. As a matter of you can barely see that. I picked the wrong color for this. You can barely see that yellow. Imagine that yellow triangle is view of a cameraman to a living room area. That camera will then pan to the right from the living room area down toward the south part of the foyer. Okay, so the pictures you're about to see are first of the living room, and you'll watch the camera draw back just a little bit and then turn to the right and then pan toward the back door where Philip Spector emerged and confessed to killing Lana Clarkson. The reason I bring this up is because the evidence will show where Lana Clarkson and Philip Spector were socializing. They had come back, the evidence will show, to the house and began drinking. The drinks that I showed, the pattern that I showed you earlier, has nothing to do with how much Philip Spector drank while he was at the house. I simply expect to present evidence about how much he drank throughout the course of the evening, how much the receipts show, how much the witnesses will say he drank. The only other witness to his drinking pattern inside the house is Lana Clarkson, and she can't tell us how much he was drinking. But we do know that there was tequila, and Lana Clarkson had been drinking as well. There was alcohol in both of their bloods. She had come over, she told Adriano de Souza, "I'll stay for one drink," and she stayed for one or more drinks. That drinking occurred in the living room. We know that because that's where the tequila bottles were, that's where the glasses were. And the evidence will show what the defendant had in mind. There were candles lit, the lights were dimmed, he put on soft music, he situated the couple in a big great room with a fireplace and big fluffy soft couches. He grabbed his bottle of tequila, a couple of glasses. The evidence will show what he had in mind. Philip Spector had romance in mind that night. But as you think about the facts of this case, look at where Lana Clarkson ended up dead. This is heading back toward that back door. Look at where her body is in comparison to the back door. Look at what she's wearing. The evidence will show that she had her shoes on. She was wearing that same slip dress she had been wearing at work. She had her jacket on. And most notably, ladies and gentlemen, she literally had her purse on her shoulder, sitting in a chair 5 feet from the back door. The evidence will show Lana Clarkson, notwithstanding the candles, the drinks, the soft music, Lana Clarkson was ready to leave. Her purse was still on her shoulder. Immediately after the shooting, Philip Spector began moving around the house. How do we know that? What physical evidence is going to be presented to prove that? To the left, that photograph is a picture of the back doorknob. You may not be able to see it clearly from there, but you'll get the photographs up close and personal, and you'll see what Philip Spector was doing. There's blood smeared all over that back doorknob. The coroner will tell you that Lana Clarkson couldn't move. She didn't move. It was physically impossible. The blood on the doorknob is Lana Clarkson's. She didn't put it there. The defendant had blood on his hands, had her blood on his hands. The latch bolt had Lana Clarkson's blood transferred to it. That blood came from Philip Spector's hands. Exactly like de Souza said. He came to the back door with blood on his hands and a gun in his hand. The banister, which is a banister right by the foyer, right across from where Lana Clarkson was found dead. That banister has transfer blood on it. It's Lana Clarkson's. As a matter of fact, all of the blood evidence that you see and you hear about in this case belongs to Lana Clarkson. None of it is Philip Spector's. How did the blood get on the banister? The defendant transferred that blood onto the banister as he went upstairs. So now we know a little bit about what the defendant was doing right after the fatal shot was fired. He was moving about the house. But what did the evidence tell he wasn't doing? As you look at these next of photographs to what's in each photograph, it may be difficult to know. Telephones in a gigantic house, in almost every room in the house, in the kitchen, the bars, the foyer area. 3 telephones, ladies and gentlemen, within 5 feet of Lana Clarkson's body. Phones everywhere, to the left, to the right, to the north, to the south. Telephones all over the house. Just in the photographs that you've seen there, 14 separate telephones, and not one. Not one. We'll introduce you to members of the Alhambra Police Department as well as the California Highway Patrol. I told you a little bit about the evidence concerning the California Highway Patrol system. I should say the 911 emergency data system. When you make a cell phone call to 911, it goes through CHP first, then it's transferred over to the responding agency. Everybody with me on that? If you make a phone call to 911 from a landline, it will go directly to the proper responding agency based on the jurisdiction you're in. If a landline call was made from Alhambra, from this residence, it would have gone directly to the Alhambra Police Department. If a cell phone call was made from inside, it would have done exactly what Sousa's call did and been routed from CHP into Alhambra. We'll introduce you to 2 people. Sandra Hill from CHP and Gamil Catalan from the Alhambra Police Department. They're emergency data systems analysts, experts in the field. They know the protocol, they know how the system works, and they know, more importantly, how the system is archived. They did searches of the archived records to find out how many how many 911 calls emanated about this incident. They can do that. Their answer? 1. Came from Adriana D'Souza. Philip Spector never called for help. From the time Adriana D'Souza made that 911 call, from the time the gunshot rang out and broke the silence at 5 o'clock in the morning or 5:04 in the morning, Philip Spector was inside that house for some 40 minutes or more by himself with Lana Clarkson laying there dead. 40 minutes to move around, 40 minutes to call for help. Yet none came. So if he wasn't calling for help, what will the evidence show he was doing? I told you there was a blood smear on the banister indicating that Phil Spector went upstairs. Well, upstairs is a dressing room, and you're looking at it. Upstairs in that dressing room was the white jacket. The white jacket that was covered in Lana Clarkson's blood. He had begun to take off his clothing, and he'd begun to try to clean up the mess that he had made. He was cleaning up what he had messed up. So the first thing he did, or along the lines of the first thing he did, is take his jacket off. And then he did something interesting. He grabbed a rag. It turned out to be a Curity diaper. Some of you may be too young to remember. Diapers now are kind of the disposable kind, but back in the old days, they had Curity diapers that were cotton. And they're fantastic for use of as a rag. Polish your car with, polish your furniture with. They're very soft cotton. Well, Philip Spector in his house had several of these Curity diapers. One of them was downstairs in a bathroom. And I want you to visualize, if you will, you've seen the pictures of Lana Clarkson, and you'll see many, many more pictures of the area where she lay dead. Right across her is the one that had the blood smeared transfer on. On the other side of that stairwell, just adjacent or across from Lana Clarkson in the foyer, is a bathroom. Again, you're looking at it. In that bathroom, found next to an open toilet, was a wet, bloody rag. What you see on the right is that rag. What you see on the left is that rag as it was found next to the toilet. What you see on the right is the rag after it had been recovered as evidence. All the dark smears that you see, they look dark brown or almost black on this. All of that is Lana Clarkson's blood. Much of that is clotted blood. And the experts will tell you the significance of that clotted blood. And what they'll tell you is that rag was wet, more than likely had a toilet or something like that. That rag was bloody. The clotted blood indicates that there was transfer from a clotting mechanism, and it takes at least 5 minutes, at minimum 5 minutes, for blood to clot. The evidence will show that this rag was not used, for instance, to stem the flow of bleeding. It was not used to render assistance to Lana Clarkson. Rather, this rag was used by Phil Spector to try to clean up what he had messed up. In a pathetic attempt, it's the only word to describe it. The evidence will establish that it was a pathetic attempt to clean her face. He began to wipe her off. And you'll see from these photographs, and I apologize about the graphic nature of them, but you'll see from these photographs that she has blood stretching all the way to her cheeks, over the bridge of her nose, to her ears, in her hair. That blood did not get there from the gunshot. She bled from 2 orifices, possibly 3, in that gunshot, her nose and her mouth, possibly a trickle from her ear. But certainly the blood did not get on her cheeks, her nose, the top of her ear, smeared in her hair because of the gunshot. That blood got where it was on Lana Clarkson because the defendant was trying to cover up his crime. He was trying to wipe her. That rag was used for. This picture is the view, basically, that Adriano D'Souza had into the interior of the house. I show it to you because if you look very, very closely where that circle is, and I've highlighted it with another photograph on the right, you can see that there's actually a gun under Lana Clarkson's left leg. That's the murder weapon. The experts will tell you, you'll meet a man by the name of Jim Carroll, who's a firearms expert, who will tell you that he established that that is, in fact, the murder weapon. It's a Colt Cobra 38 Special. Well, what's significant about that? First of all, look where it is. It's under her left leg. So then the next question becomes, what does the evidence show us about how it got there? What was going on inside that house? Lana Clarkson didn't put it there. And that 38 Special was reviewed by experts in forensic science. And those experts determined that the blood on the gun had been moved or removed.
What just happened?
What he had messed up to wipe the gun off.
That was weird.
Didn't do a very good job, just like he didn't do a very good job on her face. But you can see the circles that there's still blood in various places on the gun. But it's unquestionable that the gun had been wiped down, attempting to be wiped clean. So how did it get under her leg? After he wiped the gun down, Phil Spector attempted to set a stage for the crime scene. He put the gun under her left leg. She didn't do it. And he was the only other person in the room. As a matter of fact, if I haven't said it, the evidence will establish that he and Lana Clarkson at the time of her death were the only 2 people in the entire house. The only third person on the entire property was Adriano D'Souza, and we know where he was, outside in the Mercedes. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence will establish that the defendant, for those 40 minutes, was moving about the house, trying to clean up his crime scene. Upper face, back door, opening the door, touching the latch bolt, smearing blood on the bench, taking off his clothing, discarding bloody clothing, coming back downstairs, using a rag, wiping the gun, wiping her face, putting his hands in and out of his pockets. The interior of his pockets, ladies and gentlemen, the interior literally had blood on it. Lana's blood. The evidence will show that during the course of this, during this process, this pathetic attempt to clean up the crime scene, the defendant not only removed the evidence of blood on his own hands by either washing or removing that blood somehow, wiping his hands down, but also gunshot residue evidence. When a gun is fired, gunshot residue emanates in a cloud. It would be expected that you would find it on his hands, yet he had 40 minutes to clean that off. Although some gunshot residue was in fact found on his hands, he didn't get it all off. The evidence will also show what his attitude was toward the police when the police finally did arrive. Again, 40 minutes before they actually made their way into the house. And let me explain that. You may be thinking in your mind, that seems like an awful long time for the police to respond. Well, the police responded literally to the location within a minute or two. As a matter of fact, you heard, if you recall, Adriano D'Souza made contact with the first responding unit as he was still on the phone with 911. Everybody recalls that. The police had to set up, the Alhambra police had to set up a plan at a house, possible victim of a homicide, and he's still armed inside this castle. It's a large compound. You'll hear that they had to search different areas of the compound. In the motor court, before they actually get to the back door, there's a large garage, multi-car garage with another apartment over on top of that. They had to search and clear that. There were multiple vehicles on the lot. They had to search and clear those. But by the time they got to the back door, officers saw Adriano D'Souza, Adriano walking around upstairs. Further corroboration that he was in fact moving around upstairs, not downstairs, rendering aid to Lana Clarkson. The evidence will establish that he was moving around upstairs. They saw him, and eventually he came downstairs, looked out the back door, and he looked at the police officers as well. They were in full uniform, and he was completely, utterly uncooperative with the police. They were giving commands, the officers. Put your hands up. Step out of the doorway. Let me see your hands. Step toward me. Phil Spector variously put his hands like this, back in his pockets, out of his pockets, folded his arms, back in his pockets, up, down, completely ignoring their commands. Step out of the doorway. Move toward me. Let me see your hands. Spector ignored all those commands. The evidence will show that not one time, not once, did Spector say, "Oh my God, thank God you're here. There's a woman who's injured. Please help her." Not once. As a matter of fact, when the police continually said, "Let me see your hands. Get out here. Let me see your hands. Move toward me," Philip Spector, facing them, put his hands back in his pockets and began moving backward into the house. Finally, the police rushed him and had to subdue him. That Colt Cobra that we talked about just a second ago, the murder weapon in this case, the evidence will show that it was an unregistered gun, but the evidence will also show exactly where it came from. Lana Clarkson, as you can see from the side of this photograph on the left side, Lana Clarkson was situated at that back foyer area. Next to her in the foyer area was a bureau. The top drawer of that bureau was open. Inside the top drawer of that bureau was a holster. a Hunter holster, and you'll hear more about that in just a second. Hunter is the manufacturer. That holster and the drawer were exactly as you see it here. The drawer left ajar, the holster empty. What significance does that holster have? When the Colt Cobra is compared to that holster, take a look at this graphic at how it fits. That holster was specifically designed for that gun. That was not the only Hunter holster that Philip Spector had in his house. He had at least two others, these two that you see here. He had a preference, if you will, for that manufacturer. It was no coincidence that it was a Hunter holster that was in the bureau. And it was no coincidence, the evidence will show, that that gun, the murder weapon, fit the holster and came out of that bureau. Take a look at the bullets that were used. The murder weapon contained 6 bullets and 2 different manufacturers. It was filled, the entire chamber was filled with 6 live rounds. The 2 manufacturers were Speer and S&W plus P. Doesn't mean much to us, just 2 different manufacturers of ammunition, until you compare the fact that, again, Philip Spector had in his house 2 other guns loaded with the exact same ammunition, Speer and plus P ammunition. The evidence will establish, ladies and gentlemen, that Philip Spector owned that weapon and that it came out of that bureau drawer. And what of the white jacket? The white jacket that Mr. Spector was so quick to discard upstairs. The evidence in this case about that jacket will be the following. You'll be introduced to photographs, forensic photographs of the jacket. That's what this is. This was taken in a studio by a forensic scientist. And I want to draw your attention to the arrows on the jacket. And I want to make sure that there's no misconception. What you're looking at, the red marks on the left side, predominantly left side of that jacket, are not, in fact, blood themselves. That's not the blood. Those are arrows pointing to blood. And I want to talk for just a second about the concept and the science of blood spatter. You're going to hear, I think Ms. Kinney Bodden mentioned this several times. Mr. Rosen mentioned it several times, and they said that this case is going to be heavily about science. Well, there is going to be some science in this case. But as you can see from the presentation of the People's case, this is not all about science. There's a lot of other evidence other than science as well. The blood spatter evidence could be considered scientific evidence. And let me explain that word and what we expect the evidence will show about that word and educate you about that word a little bit. A lot of people use the word splatter. If you slam your hand in a puddle of liquid, grape juice or something, it'll splatter on you. There's actually no L in the word spatter as scientists use it. It's blood spatter or liquid spatter, all right? So I'm not misspeaking when I say that. There are 2 types of spatter evidence. You know, there's several more types, but 2 types that we'll be most interested in. Forward spatter and back spatter. Forward spatter is simply the following. The evidence will show through the experts that if in fact you fire a weapon, fire a gun into a human body, and the bullet penetrates the front and exits the back, the trajectory of that bullet sometimes will take along with it droplets of blood, and the blood will spread and follow that same line the bullet is taking. That's forward spatter. Or in some cases, not every case, but in some cases, if you fire a weapon into an organic substance, something with liquid in it, i.e. a human body, you fire a bullet into that, sometimes the energy and the gases created are so enormous that tiny droplets, and some not so tiny, will move backward and float and drift backward toward the source of the bullet. That's considered backspatter. And what you'll hear about in this case is about spatter, not forward spatter. Lana suffered a wound that did not exit. But the experts will tell you that in fact there was backspatter in this case. And the size of the spatter that you'll see is the determining factor about distance. I don't know how else to say. Let me explain that for just a second. I know how it droplets. What will happen, as the experts will explain, is that when that energy is high enough, when that bullet impact is high enough, there will be sometimes a tiny bit of particulate matter that goes backward in a mist form. It's so tiny that it's called misting, an aerosol can, if you can kind of picture that. Tiny, tiny little droplets, almost too small to see with the naked eye, about 1 millimeter in diameter. If you were to look at this picture, take a look at the button for comparison in this photograph. The particulate matter that you're going to see on Philip Spector's jacket are particles probably half the size of one of the holes on the button. I'm going to make it larger for you. That's what you're looking at. That's an enhanced photograph of an example of that particulate matter that drifts backward toward the source of the bullet. And what will the evidence show about that particulate matter?
I love Alan Jackson, but I don't think he needs to get this in depth in an opening.
If anybody's thrown a wiffle ball versus a baseball, they'll get this. The larger the mass, the further it travels. The smaller the mass, the less far it travels. This tiny particulate matter, under the laws of physics, only travels a certain distance from the spatter mechanism, from the spatter producing event. Only a certain distance. And the experts know exactly what that distance is, or can estimate what that distance is to a pretty close, or a pretty defined length, I should say. That distance is about 3 feet, a maximum of about 3 feet. That misting pattern will not travel further than that. Gravity and friction, et cetera, will take over and it'll fall. One of the things that you will find during the course of the presentation of the evidence in this case is that not only did Philip Spector's jacket have that very defined misting pattern spatter on it, Lana Clarkson's own skirt had that same spatter pattern. The photograph on the right was taken at the exact same magnification, 6.7. And you'll see that the spatter pattern of those two droplets on the right, it's very difficult for you to see there. It'll become much more clear when you see the actual photo. The two little droplets that you see on her skirt, and it looks brown here, but that's actually a high magnification of her slip dress, down around the lap of her slip, bears the exact same signature spatter pattern. And what does that tell us? The evidence will show that we know exactly how far her skirt was from the gunshot. That gives us deep insight into how far his jacket was from the gunshot. We'll introduce you to Dr. Lynn Harold, a PhD and an expert forensic scientist. Dr. Harold will tell you that the high energy backspatter on his jacket was from a gunshot wound and not another source. She'll tell you that the misting pattern from that gunshot is on both Spector's jacket and on Lana's slip dress. And she'll tell you, among other things, that the laws of physics, the laws of biology, the laws of chemistry tell us how far that jacket had to have been, or more pointedly, how close that jacket had to have been from the gunshot wound. She'll tell you it was within 3 feet or closer. Ladies and gentlemen, I told you when we started talking about this and we moved into the events of February 2nd and 3rd, 2003, that the evidence would illustrate a pattern that begins to emerge. And now that you've been told what that evidence will show, take a look at the pattern that emerges for Lana Clarkson. On February 3rd, 2003, at his house in Alhambra, the defendant had been drinking to excess. He had a romantic interest in Lana Clarkson, unquestionably a romantic interest. He was the one that was seeking her attention. He was the one that was seeking her company, not vice versa. He coaxed her back to his house where they would be alone. She tried to leave, no question about it. She's situated at the back door with her clothes on, her jacket on, her purse slung over her shoulder, not 10 feet from the car that would have driven her to safety, separated only by a closed door. The defendant pulled his handgun, his gun, out of his bureau drawer, secured in his holster, and loaded with his bullets. And he shot Lana Clarkson through the mouth. A single gunshot. Ladies and gentlemen, the defendant's history of violence, his conduct all through February 2nd and February 3rd, the physical evidence that you'll see in this case, the forensic evidence that you'll see in this case, all of that evidence taken together will give deep meaning to the defendant's own words, his own confession. A confession, ladies and gentlemen, I think I killed somebody, that still echoes in this courtroom today. At the close of the presentation of all of the evidence in this case, we're confident that you'll be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Philip Spector is guilty of the murder of Lana Clarkson. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. Cutler, who's going to lead off? Who's going to lead off for the defense? You may proceed. Yeah, I'm sorry.
We just have a moment.
Yes.
Yay, we're done. Okay, yay! Thank you guys for coming out. I am so sorry about all the technical issues. I guess I'm going to have to go to a higher speed on my new high-speed internet because it's not quite as fast as I needed to be. So now I was going to start at 10. Yeah, I noticed their hair was the same color. I don't think he dyed his hair. I think he wore a wig because his hair changes repeatedly. Yeah. I think he went too in depth on his opening, though. He should have just stayed like short and sweet. Although it was good that he got in the past stuff because I didn't know all that. That's crazy. Okay, so I have it scheduled for 10. No apologies allowed. For the corn rake murder, which is not really a trial, I guess. I don't know. They're calling it a civil trial, but I don't think it's civil because he's trying to get a new trial because he says there's new information. Like I said, she was hit, I guess. Hit? Is it stabbed if it's with a rake? I don't know. She was found face down with a rake sticking out of her back, which, how do you fall on a rake when it's sticking out of your back? That makes no sense. Anyway, so that is next. No, it's not a defamation case. It's a murder trial. He wants a new trial, but they're calling it a civil trial. That to me isn't, that's still criminal. He wants it, I don't know. Poked, hit. So what, you fall back on it and then roll over? I don't know. I'm clumsy too. I'm very clumsy. Okay, so that's what I'm doing next. So I'm going to end this stream, go take a short break, and then start the next stream. So if you guys want to join me over there, or if you're going somewhere else, I will see you later. You guys have a great day. I love you. Thanks for coming out. Bye.